Hi, it's Grogs here, and I've come to talk about something that could be very, very distressing for some of you. It's a very important topic, so keep your finger on the pause button because you might have to stop it, especially if you haven't heard anything about some of the stuff I'm going to share with you today. But I think it's important to know, so I hope you do stick with me. I grew up on 4 acres of land in a place called Maddington, an outer suburb of Perth in the time. It was with the neighbouring suburb of Kenwick were built on clay flats. And it was typically 4, 5, and up to 10 acre blocks with a few smaller properties around the railway station, which were, probably more your quarter acre. Now, there were a lot of Italians living in Maddington at the time. In fact, there were 3 Italian families or brothers lived over the road from my dad. They were good mates of my dad. And they were fairly typical of the people who'd live out there. They would buy a few acres and they would grow their grapevines and a few fruit trees and olive trees and so on. And Kenwick was very, very similar. I don't remember there being many Italian families in Kenwick, although there may have been, but there was a Greek family there. I certainly remember them. They had a little property there where they used to grow their own food, including animals as well. They'd have their own milk and so on. Now, they had a daughter, actually, who went to the same school as me. We were in the same art class, and I was pretty keen on her, just to digress. But my dad, as soon as I showed any interest in her, Dad said, no, you're not going to marry her. Finish that off because otherwise you have to get married in the Greek Orthodox Church. We were Roman Catholic and there was no way that Dad was going to let me get married in the Greek Orthodox Church. Now, on that point, just again to digress, be very careful how you handle your kids' relationships. As they get into relationships with someone that they like, be very careful you don't let religion or politics or anything like that spoil the party. Just be wise in those choices. Anyway, Dad was raising these horses and he needed pasture. So if you're going to grow pasture, particularly in the hot climate of Western Australia, then you need water in the summer. So Dad decided he'd sink a bore, and he decided to dig the bore down at the back of the property at an area we used to call the swamp. The swamp was a low-lying area that used to fill up with water in the winter. I think it was probably part of the original Bickley Brook, which was nearby. And over time, the creek had changed course, and this was what we were left with. So what Dad would do, he would get a post hole digger like this one, a little bit different from this one in as much as, whereas this one, this T-piece, this handle is fixed, Dad would use threaded pipe and he would go down about 3 or 4 feet, then he would unscrew the handle, put another extension on, put the handle back on, he would dig and dig and dig, and down we'd go. Each 3 or 4 feet we'd add another piece on. But when we got to about 11 feet, after going through the clay, which was relatively easy, we would hit this sand, which is a very coarse river-like sand. It was very similar to what you'd find in the bottom of a creek around the bottom of the hills. So to get that out, you couldn't use the post hole digger because the post hole digger couldn't grip it. So what we would use is a sludge pump. This is a sludge pump. Now the sludge pump, I don't know whether you can see it or not, but there's a little ball in the bottom here. And what would happen is we would put a rope on this hoop here, and then we would drop it down into the bore and we'd just gently pump it like this, and the sand would move past the ball bearing, and once it was full, you got a bit of an idea it was full, you'd haul it back up, empty it out, and start again. Now this little piece of equipment here was made by one of my dad's mates, a fellow called Mick Zammett, who lived in Maddington. Mick was a bit of an inventor. He could make all sorts of stuff out of steel. I don't think he ever knew how to cut a piece of wood, maybe chop it to put it on the fire, but he made everything out of steel, and he made this for my dad. And this is one of the few things that I kept when my dad passed away. I kept it as a memento because I just thought it was just part of my growing up. Now, I'm glad I kept it because I've decided I have to dig a bore at my place in Byford. Now, you might wonder why I would want to put a bore down in Byford when I've only got a 400 square metre block. I'm hardly going to need the water for my garden. However, I watched a documentary recently and it scared the pants off me. You know, I don't know what you believe about climate change, but I'm a bit of a climate change skeptic. I won't say I'm a denier because I do believe that the climate is changing. I just don't believe that it's being caused by man. We have all kinds of things happening, such as volcanoes, big volcanic activity, the tilt of the earth, that's changing, so that affects climate. In the 1970s, there was a big thing about solar flares, or sunspots as we used to call them, and they were having a big effect on our climate, and they were going to bring about an ice age. That's right, back in the 1970s, we were scared that there was going to be an ice age. But all of a sudden, they no longer seem to be relevant apart from affecting communications, but the science disappeared out of the world, and they're no longer a problem with the climate. Instead, it's plastic bags and plastic cups, plastic tops on your coffee cup. And of course, we've got a big problem with people like me who drive around in diesel cars, and we've got petrol cars, and these are apparently the big problem, and we've got to get rid of them so that we can fix the climate. Now, if I'm to believe the so-called science, then the polar ice caps are melting. And that's what I was watching on this documentary, and it was pretty scary, because if the rate that they're deteriorating, which they're saying, I don't believe it, but let's say it's true, then what's going to happen is the sea levels will rise. Now back in the 1990s, we used to have a bit of a laugh about all this nonsense, that if the sea is going to rise, we'll buy a property in the hills, because eventually you'll end up with a seaside property, be able to put a mooring there and have your boat there, and you can have a seaside property, whereas you used to live in the hills and you'd even change addresses. Now, you have to be serious, because if it's true, then there's a lot of land around the world, here in Perth, because it's fairly low-lying, a lot of Perth, it's all going to end up inundated. So we have to take it seriously. But then it occurred to me, what if the flat earthers are right? Now, I'm not a flat earther. I'm a surveyor. Now, I know for a fact that the earth is a globe, because I used to measure the curvature of the earth when I was doing surveys on big projects. And I could use stars and the sun to position myself on the earth using a theodolite and a stopwatch. And it wouldn't matter where you did this, you'd always get the latitude and the longitude using these calculations. And it wouldn't matter which theodolite you used or which stopwatch you used, you'd always get the same result for the pegs. Now, I did these surveys at my house in Kelmscott. I did them at the West Australian Institute of Technology, which is now Curtin in Bentley, Western Australia. I did them at Muresk Agricultural College in Spencer's Brook. I did them on Mount Bakewell in York, and I did them in Albany. And if other surveyors came along after me or before me, we always got the same result. So I know that the earth is a globe. But what if I am wrong? What if the conspiracy theorists are right, and those amazing calculations that we use to come up with all that information on global positioning and so on, if there was some sort of a fraud there? I'd like to meet the guy who invented that, by the way. But if that's true, then we have a big problem, because if the polar ice caps melt, okay, we've got rising sea levels, okay, we just move further up the hill. But what if the flat earthers, who have this theory that there's a big wall of ice around the edge of the disk of the earth, if it melts, then the ocean's going to fall over the edge. It's all going to flow over the edge, and we won't have any oceans left. And if we don't have oceans, we won't have the climate that we enjoy now, which causes rain, which fills up the dams, runoff, and it soaks into the ground, so we've got this aquifer. So I've started to stockpile water just in case they're right. So I've got some plastic containers, some 20-litre plastic containers stored up in the roof of my garage here, and I'm going to have to fill those up with water. And in the meantime, I'm going to dig myself a bore so that I will have a water supply, at least for a time. I might have to dig 200, 300, 400 feet or more to be able to access that water that's in the ground, so that I'll have something to drink. Now, I've got to start that urgently, because the polar ice caps, if I'm to believe the climate scientists, is going to happen within the next 10 years. By the way, it was going to happen within 10 years, at least twice in the last 20 years, so it's not proving to be right. And Greta Thunberg, or whatever she calls herself, is looking more and more like an idiot. But just in case it turns out she's right, I have to start digging the bore. So look, in the meantime, I'd like to propose a toast to my dad, Tom Grogan, who taught me how to dig a bore. I'd like to propose a toast to Dad's mate, Mick Zammit, who was I was a bit like a son to him. He didn't have kids, so I was a bit like a son to him. In fact, my first toolbox I ever got at the age of 11 was given to me by Mick, and I've still got most of those tools, apart from the ones that one of my sons, who will remain nameless, borrowed, and I never saw again, but I have most of the tools. And I'd also like to propose a toast to My Greek girlfriend, wherever she is, I don't know what happened to her. I often wonder whatever happened to her. It's over 50 years ago that we left school. And I seem to remember that she loved crunching on ice. So wherever she is, if she's still crunching on ice, here's to you too. And here's to you all around the world who need to stock up on water. And if you want to borrow my post hole digger and my sludge pump, when I finish with it, give me a hoy and I'll come around and I'll give you a hand. So cheers. And if all else fails, beam me up, Scotty.